So I've been getting asked more and more, like, why are you hobbling around all the time? Because I walk like I'm in a gang. So it's because I have a bad left knee and I get a brand new left knee in October. So I don't know if that'll be nice or not. I'm not looking forward to surgery. My wife isn't either, because I'm a needy patient. That's all I'm saying. We all know that men get sicker than women. We just know that. And they're in far more pain than women. That's just a fact. I'm kidding, it's not. So today we're in Genesis, and this is part 4, and today we're talking about Abraham. Genesis is so full of information. It is just, there's a crazy amount of stuff that happens. I mean, we talk about the creation of the world, we talk about the flood that happens, and now we're moving on as we continue to go on. We learn about this guy named Abraham. He's a direct descendant of Noah and Shem, and you go right down the line, and there you get Abraham. And Abraham is one of those guys that God uses in a powerful way. And so if you get a chance this week, I'd really encourage you to read Genesis chapter 12 through 25. That's really where you're going to find the whole story of Abraham and his kids and all the stuff that happens. Because what I have to say is only just a small portion of all of the events that transpired in his life. But after today, when you go home and you read it, you're going to have a deeper and better understanding of what's going on, because there are so many details that unless you kind of learn them and unpack them, you're like, oh, that's a pivotal moment. And as you pray about it and think about it, just see what God has in store for you. So today we're going to Genesis chapter 12, where we learn about this. It's called a covenant that God makes with Abraham. Now, the Old Testament has 7 different covenants that God makes with his people. Some of them are between God. You know, God says he's going to do this. Others between human beings. But a covenant, there's 2 types of covenants, and this is important. There's a conditional covenant, and then there's the unconditional covenant. What a covenant is it's a promise. God says, I'm going to do this. Or people make covenants between each other, right? Like you live in an HOA, you have a covenant that nobody agrees to. But anyways, you have them written down somewhere behind your shed. You got to find it. But anyways, what a conditional covenant, and parents do this all the time, it means that if you do this, then I'll do that, right? For example, if you eat all of your food, then you get dinner or dessert. Eat all your food, then you get dessert. Or we do it with our kids, right? If you're trying to potty train them, like, if you just go potty on the stool, then you get to watch a cartoon. And so we're doing these conditional covenants all the time. If you do this, then you get this reward. That's just kind of how we operate. Especially if you're a parent, you get this because you do it all the time. But an unconditional, it's called unilateral unconditional covenant, is one that says that regardless of what you do, it's still going to take place. So God makes this covenant with Abram, which really isn't with Abram, it's with himself, where God says, this is what I'm going to do. And it really didn't matter what Abraham did. God says, I am going to do this covenant. I'm making this covenant with myself. So he makes this covenant with himself that really Abraham and all of his descendants are to receive the blessing. Now, in this section of text, we hear 2 names, Abram and Abraham, same guy, all right? Abram and Abraham, same person, but as I talk today, I'm going to usually say Abraham. And if I say Abram, just so you know, same. So, Abram means high father. And Abraham means multitude. It's important to understand that. So this is the covenant, this promise that God gives Abraham in Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3. It's called the Abrahamic covenant. It says this, the Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. At the time, Abraham was 75 years old, and he was living in Mesopotamia. Nobody knows where that is, but if you know where Iraq is, that's Mesopotamia. And kind of interestingly, during the Persian Gulf War, that's where I was. And had no idea. This is like where Abraham was and the Euphrates, and I wasn't a Christian then. I wasn't really into Bible things. And you look back and go, man, I wish I was a Christian then. I would have seen all kinds of cool stuff. Me? Nope, not at all. So this is a unilateral covenant that God made. Because in the ancient world, to make a covenant, they would like seal a covenant. And they didn't have lawyers who would pencil these contracts together and bring them before the governments. They made a covenant, and it was common in the old world. And to me, this is really gross, but it's how they did it. They would take an animal, cut it into two pieces, and they would walk, the two parties involved in the covenant would walk through the pieces of animal, and that would be a covenant. That would be a lasting, binding covenant between them. Again, that's kind of gross, but that's what they did. And so here, God tells Abraham, I want you to get these animals, and I'm going to make a covenant. And so Abraham gets them, cuts them in half, some of the doves, and anyways, then when God is going to make this covenant with Abraham, what he does is he puts Abraham into a deep sleep, and God himself comes in the form of a fire pot and a torch. And he goes between the pieces himself. That alone is symbolic. I won't get into that. But he goes between these pieces. So really, God is making a covenant with himself. He's saying, I will do that. And since Abraham was present, but not really, he was kind of out of it, God is saying he's making this covenant with himself. This is what he will do. So this is this binding for those that witnessed or heard about it later. No, this is a binding covenant that God made. So what does this covenant entail? Well, it entails the three pieces. The first is the promise of land. In the covenant, God says, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. And so Abraham begins this difficult task. He had all kinds of property, or he had animals and great wealth. And he goes on this journey from where he's at in modern-day Iraq. He travels down to Egypt. Now, this is where the drama starts. So when I say drama, some of the stuff is real drama, like it's actual drama. And this is where the drama starts. Because Abraham was married to a woman named Sarah. Sarah was a really good-looking woman. She's 60 years old, but she's pretty hot. Not like I have a picture of her on my phone, but the Bible says that she's hot. She's a good looker. And Abraham was so concerned about it that he said, Sarah, I want you to tell the Egyptians that you're my sister. Why? Why would he do that? Well, because that way they wouldn't treat him poorly. Because in the old days, back then, if I'm married to this really smoking hot wife, they're like, nice to meet you, kill him, and then she would be a widow. So they would marry him. So he's thinking Pharaoh, she's a really good looking woman. She's 60 years old. Pharaoh's younger than her probably. He's going to want her. So he says, tell her my sister. I just think this is fascinating. Here's a man. God speaks to him, makes a covenant with him, says, I'm going to do this. And now you've got this man who a short period later believes that the Egyptians are going to hurt him and that God won't protect him. You catch that? This great pillar of the faith who had a conversation with God, now he's afraid of the Egyptians. It just blows my mind. We look at this guy as a pillar of the faith, and yet he feared the Egyptians more than he believed that God would protect him. So this is good news for you and good news for me. It's good news for you and good news for you. Why is that? It's because of this. Even if you screw things up, God can still use you. Even if you doubt God, God can still use you and he will use you. So often we think, you know what, I messed this up, I screwed this up, I grenaded it. How could God ever use me? I mean, I've done things in the past, I've hurt people, or I find myself, I've walked away from God. And the cool thing about God is God says no matter where you are, if you turn back to him, he will draw near you and he will lead you and he will guide you. If you ever doubt that, just look at Abraham, a guy who had a direct conversation with God and then starts to doubt whether or not God is actually going to protect him. And he's used him in a powerful way. That's also why we know this is unilateral covenant that God says he's just going to do it. And his decision wasn't based on Abraham's willingness to trust God or not. God just said, I'm still going to do it. And you're going to make mistakes in your life. You're going to blow situations up. You're going to say things that you shouldn't say. You're going to do things that you probably shouldn't do. And the good news, though, is that God still loves you. And if you lean into him, he'll lead you where you need to go. So all of a sudden, Pharaoh marries Sarah, and they treat Abraham all right because, well, they think it's his sister. So they're going to bless him because she's with Pharaoh now. And, you know, they weren't like together, if you know what I mean. They were just married. And all of a sudden, things started to go sideways for the Egyptians. Like, they had bad things happening left and right and left and right. And they're super superstitious people. And so they start trying to figure out, why have all of these bad things happened to us? And they trace it back to Sarah. And the Egyptians go to Abraham and they said, is Sarah really your sister? He goes, no, it's my wife. And they're like, that's the problem. And so they actually give him more animals, more silver, more gold, and they tell him just to leave. True. But doesn't this ring of years later when the Israelites would be enslaved to the Egyptians and leave with all of their stuff? Like, God is foretelling what is to come. Actually, in Genesis 15, God tells Abraham that at some point in the future, your people, your descendants, are going to be enslaved for 400 years. So we see this now looking back on it and go, wow. But back then, he didn't know. God just told him, your people will be enslaved for 400 years. So again, we have this prophecy actually that God has this foretelling. He says, this is what is going to happen. So the first promise is, God says, I'm going to give you land. Second promise is that he's going to have, you're going to have a lot of descendants. They're going to be as numerous as the sand on the seashore. And Genesis 2 says, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. The only problem is that Abraham didn't have any kids. He's got a smoking hot wife, 60 years old. She's beyond her childbearing years. And God says, I'm going to make you into a great nation. He's thinking, right, I don't have kids. Like, he's older. She's older. That ship done sailed. Like, it is not in port. You can't even see it from the shore. It's gone. And God says, I'm going to use you, and I'm going to, in a powerful way. And so Abraham starts complaining to God, and he's contemplating what's going to happen. Like, I don't have any kids. So once again, he's doubting. He's doubting God. And so God comes to him again. In Genesis chapter 15, it's recorded verses 5 through 7. Abraham's doubting. I'm too old. I'm not going to have kids. I don't know what's going to happen. And God tells him a second time. He says, he took him outside and said, look up the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Now he's thinking to himself, I'm like 85 years old. Sarah's 70 now. Not a chance. Then it says, Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. So he did a good thing. He believed the Lord. He also said to them, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur, out of the Chaldeans, out of Iraq, to give you this land and to take possession of it, the land where he was. So he's saying, you're going to be the father of a great nation. You're going to be the father of a great nation. The only deal is they didn't have kids. And what happens? She doesn't get pregnant right away. It's like weeks and months and then years and years. So you know what he does? They come up with plan B. So Sarah, Abraham's wife, says, hey, why don't you, do the thing with Hagar and have kids with her? And that'll be like, we'll carry on the lineage this way. And so he does it. Hagar's much younger. Abraham does the thing. And next thing you know, they have a child born to him named Ishmael. Now, why is this important? I'll get to that in a minute. Abraham and Sarah had a plan B, and it didn't work out so well. How many of you have had a plan B? Like, God gives you a plan A, and you say, I have a better plan. How'd that work out for you? You know in your heart, for example, you know in your heart that you were not supposed to marry that woman, but you did anyways. Or you knew you were not supposed to marry that guy. You knew he had issues, but you thought you could change him. God told you no. You said, oh no, I have a better plan. Or you know that you're not supposed to buy that whatchamathingy, and you say, I'm going to buy it anyways, and you buy it and you're miserable for it. Or you know you shouldn't take the job. It's with people you don't like, selling a product you don't even use, and you do it anyways. And now your plan B is not doing so well. How many of us have had these plan Bs that don't work out so well? I mean, I can say it time and time again. I've had a lot of my own plan Bs. Abraham had a plan B, and it did not work out so well. It just didn't. It didn't. You need to listen to what God says. And sometimes when God makes a promise to you, it isn't fulfilled instantly. God said to Abraham, I will make you the father of a great nation. And it didn't happen on his time, so he did a plan B. And it didn't work out so well. It didn't. You knew you shouldn't send that text, but you sent that text anyways. You knew you shouldn't have made that call, you made it anyways. You started your own plan B. Jump ahead to Genesis chapter 17. Verses 1 through 8 reveals how God appeared to Abraham again to begin to start fulfilling his covenant with him. And this is where God defines where his land will be. Chapter 17, verses 1 through 8, it says, when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him again. So God keeps appearing to him again and again and again. And every time God does and reassures his promise, Abraham does something sideways. Like he goes out in the rhubarb patch, he winds up in the cornfield, he goes the wrong direction. And yet God is still there. He made this covenant with him that's unconditional. If it was conditional, Abraham would have been a mess. But it wasn't. So he's 99 years old. The Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will confirm my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers. Abram fell face down, and God said to him, as for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham. Remember, that means multitude. Be the father of many. For I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. The whole land of Canaan, where you are now an alien, I will give you as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God. Abraham already had a kid through Hagar. They thought their plan B was going to work, and God says to them again, no, your child with Hagar, your servant, is not your lineage like God had foretold. It's not going to fly. Then God says this in verse 16 and 17, I will bless her, that's Sarah, and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. The kings of peoples will come from her. And then it continues, Abram fell face down. Why? To pray? No. He laughed and said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? So God is telling him you're going to have a kid. And he's like, right. You know I'm 100 years old. Like he probably quit buying green bananas because it was too much of an investment. Like he's thinking, I'm done. Then verse 19. Then God said, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. And the thing is, Sarah didn't even get pregnant right after that. It's still a lot of time passed. Years passed. Years passed. But here's the problem. When she finally did get pregnant, it was like 15 years later, and she has Isaac as a son. Now he's got Hagar, has Ishmael, and now there's Isaac. So here's why this pertains to us today. So right now in the world, in Israel, the nation of Israel, the Palestinians are constantly fighting with the Jewish people, right? Constantly fighting. And here's where it all stems from. See, the Muslims believe that the real prophet that Muhammad came from was Ishmael. And they believe that their lineage is traced back to Ishmael, that he is the promised son. This is what Muhammad says. And they believe that Israel, the nation of Israel, is their promised land. Now, Jewish people and Christians say, no, according to the Bible, it comes from Isaac. Isaac is the promised son. And it's from Isaac's lineage that you can trace all the way down to the Messiah, Jesus Christ. We know that he was born of a virgin, but yet he had human DNA. So we know this. So because of that, ever since then, they've been fighting over the same land because both believe that God has given them that piece of land. So even today, when you turn on the news and see all this conflict happening, it can be traced back to one decision. It can all be traced back to this. So I want you to think about this. Sometimes the decisions you make have lasting consequences. Lasting consequences. Not just for you, but for others. When you make that call or do that thing that you know you shouldn't do, there are lasting consequences that can affect your children, your family relationships, your community, your reputation. So the next time you say, hey guys, watch this, or hold my beer, or whatever else you say, think about some of those lasting ramifications that come. And on a more serious note, I think you know what I'm talking about. Think about those ramifications. So the third promise in the covenant was the promise to bring blessing and redemption to all Abraham's people. God makes this promise again to Isaac in 21:12 and 26:3 and 4, and again to Jacob in 28:14 and 15. So despite all the drama that happened in Abraham's life, God still said, I will bless you. And we look back on history, and Israel as a nation has been formed, and we know that there's descendants as many as the stars in the sky. Like, we know that God fulfilled this promise. But here's the thing about the land. God still says, when it comes to land, he says, I will give you this land. And what's fascinating to me is that right now, according to the Bible and according to the nation of Israel, they do not have all of the land that was promised to them. That speaks into some prophecy. I'm not going to have time to get into that today, but that speaks into prophecy and how that goes with the book of Revelation and how God ultimately is going to fulfill his plan, and he will fulfill the other end of this covenant, the last part of this covenant. So God said that he was going to bless and redeem all of Abraham's descendants. And the good news is this, is that if you were a follower of Christ, you were adopted into God's family. You're adopted in. That means that you are eligible to receive the blessings that God has in store for you. You're able to receive all of those promises that he gave Abraham when he said, I'm going to bless you, I'm going to bless your descendants. So now, because of Jesus Christ, we can be adopted into the family of God. That's spoken of a lot in the New Testament, how we are heirs of the throne of grace. We're adopted into the family of God. And so that gives us enormous strength and courage. So in all of the uncertainty that we face now, even with that train wreck that's happening in Afghanistan right now, even in the midst of all of this COVID mess that we're dealing with, even in the midst of all of the world powers at conflict, we as Christians can have peace because we know that God is still in control. We know that God is still in control. Even when your life seems like it's spinning out of control and you have no plan, we trust in God who does have a plan. We lean into our faith and we say, God, I will trust you. I will follow you. I will walk with you. I will serve you. So the epic climax of Abraham's life is when God tells him to take his one and only son and to sacrifice him. Now, God is not, the Bible is not human sacrifice. No way, no how. That's a pagan practice. But God is creating here for us to look back on. It's called an archetype. It means it's a picture, a foretelling of what was to come. So he's at Abraham's well. They're having a water dispute. God says, I want you to take your son Isaac, go on a 3-day walk. And when you get there, you would go, and that's where you're going to sacrifice your son. We know that doesn't happen. But he goes, I want you to go there. And this is really fascinating, is that a 3-day walk from Abraham's well puts you in the city of Jerusalem, right smack dab in the center of Jerusalem. And scholars believe the place where Abraham took his son Isaac is the exact location where Jesus Christ died on the cross, before it was even a city. It was just a hill country then. This is another foretelling of what God was going to do. Way back in the book of Genesis, he paints this picture of what Christ would do for us. And as the story unfolds, Abraham takes Isaac up to this location, and then before he sacrifices him, God provides a lamb. Says, stop, don't do that, stop. God provides the ram in his place. And again, it's another picture of the substitutionary atonement that we have. A lot of theology there. And the fact that Isaac was actually willing to go with his father to the place, not even knowing what was going to happen. Again, it's a foretelling. He knew it was going to happen, but it's a foretelling of this beautiful picture of Christ. And that's a whole nother message series. So out of this today, and let me wrap this up and say this. Even if your life has gone sideways in several different directions, the only thing keeping you from doing the will of God is you. You're it. God says, I don't care where you've been, I care where you're going. God says, I want to use you wherever you're at. You're like, Lord, I've been outside of your will for so long, I don't even know where your will is. God says, your will starts now, today, here. So wherever you're at, you step up, you trust God. God will use you for his glory. He will fill you with a sense of purpose. He will renew your strength. He will give you direction. If maybe you've doubted or had fears, you just say, I'm going to stake a claim and say, Jesus, I'm trusting you today. If you used Abraham and he denied you, lied about his sister, went in the wrong direction, if God used him as a man of righteousness, you can use you. So the only thing keeping you from following God even closer is you. It's not God. God has his hand out and he says, follow me, and it's up to us to step up and to walk with him and to receive the blessing that he has. That's peace, comfort, strength, wisdom, whatever it is. You are a child of God and eligible for the same promise that was given Abraham. Heavenly Father, help us today to walk in your will and to understand your ways. We look at Abraham, and I know that he messed up several times. And yet, God, you fulfilled your promises to him and through him. And we thank you today that we're adopted into your family, that we, Lord, can follow you and to walk with you. And God, we stand on your grace. We stand on your love. And we rejoice, God, in all the great things that you have in store for us. Thank you, God, that you can use a crooked stick to draw a straight line, that you can use us for your glory. And all God's people said or typed, Amen. Amen.